at the core of the educational enterprise. You know, they're the heart of what goes on between teachers and learners. So I think the opportunity, first of all, to focus specifically on teaching and learning and having a whole programme devoted to that particular focus. I think that was really the first thing. I think the second thing was about developing a community of researchers around that particular theme, which enabled them to exchange both their substantive work, their empirical work, their theoretical background and insights, and also their methodological approaches. And that, I think, enables people to reflect on their own and possibly develop their own in relation to work that's been going on elsewhere. So that, I think, is another thing. And I think another aspect of the programme that's very important was the support for both the development of the research within projects and also the dissemination, help with the dissemination. Because in my experience, dissemination is always a problem because most of your funding goes on carrying out the research and analysing the results. Much of the writing starts during that phase, but actually continues considerably afterwards. And I think having a continuing programme provided the kind of support and incentive to keep focused on delivering outputs, if you like. More and more, I think, there's a focus on the importance of capacity building. Perhaps it was always there, but it became acute when a demographic review of research showed that many of the people who were working in educational research were actually going to retire within 10 years. Perhaps the majority of educational researchers are going to retire. And there was issues about the next generation of leaders within educational research. So the need to build capacity was urgent. There was also the continuing issues about what kind of capacity and the identification of some areas where there was perhaps less expertise than might be desired, and particularly in things like quantitative methods. So the work that was done during the course of the programme, I think, was very important. Initially, in the first phase, I think it was about providing people with resources, providing them with courses that they could attend, and I think that my perception is that the researchers found that very useful. Later on, it moved to more of a social processes model and building the strength of communities to build their own capacity. So I think there's more of a social interaction model that was pursued in the later stages. And I think one of the interesting things, although it's by no means complete, is actually developing the website as if you like, a repository for material that could be added to in the future, not by necessarily TLRP, but other organisations like BERA, for instance, to enable them to have tools and resources that they could use in capacity building. So I think that that area of capacity building in its many dimensions was very important. And the other area, I think, is also, in terms of thematic work, that there wasn't any way in which TLRP could carry out a conventional meta-analysis of projects to discover what worked in terms of particular teaching techniques, for example, because the variety of projects was so wide, their questions were very wide, their methodologies were very wide. And so they didn't have common instruments, or rarely had common instruments, neither did they have similar questions, always. So one had to develop synthetic work, or thematic work, in a rather different way. And I think nevertheless that was really very, very valuable. It enabled us not only to address contemporary issues as and when they emerged, as it's very important, and develop such things as our commentary series, and holding seminars on particular themes. It very importantly enabled us to actually draw in people other than the programme to highlight the issues and to also bring their own data and evidence to those themes. So although we say that we've got something like 700 researchers working with the TLRP, actually it's been greater than that, because very often in these thematic seminar series or in the writing of commentaries, we've involved people from outside the tightly defined TLRP and brought them in to contribute also to the work that we've done. For instance, I was working on a thematic group on the assessment of significant learning outcomes, and that developed 5 seminars involving a number of people from different sectors in education, but also bringing in projects that were outside of or beyond TLRP at that time as well as those within TLRP. It also brought in user groups as well, those some of whom had been involved with TLRP previously and others who hadn't. And it issued in a number of publications, including, I suppose, the assessment commentary, which was partly written by the Assessment Reform Group. And that was another group of 10 academics, some of whom had been involved in TLRP projects and others who hadn't. So I think there's that kind of, that thematic work had 2 benefits. One was actually to do the kind of substantive synthesis of ideas and evidence. But alongside that, it had the advantage of bringing together a larger group of academics and users than was within the funded program.